So today we'll learn how to do French seam. So here I have my fabric. So this is right side up, RSU, right side up. The French seam may seem a little strange because the usual seam we would have made the right sides facing inside and we would have stitched and joined them together this way. But for the French seam, since each seam is actually stitched twice, the first stitch, we're going to do it with the right sides on the outside. That way. Okay. So match your raw edges together. I'm going to stitch at 0.6 cm away from the edge. That will be my first stitch line. So before we start stitching, we would like to make sure that our machine setting is correct. So you need to make sure that your stitch type, the front dial, is at number 2. Your stitch length needs to be at 2.5. The needle position is going to be at 0. For top thread tension, it's going to be at 4 default. Okay, so that's the seam I want to sew. So for a guide, I'll use the edge of the footer to line up the raw edge of my fabric. I'll put my needle in. I'm going to reverse at the start and end of my stitch line. That's my first stitch line. So I've stitched the first stitch line. Now I need to press it open. You might want to use an iron to press it. Take a look at your raw edges. If they are fraying very badly, you might want to go in and trim the fray areas down a little bit. So I've pressed the seams open and I'm going to fold it over. Okay. So I'm going to fold it down the first seam line. Now I'm going to do the second stitch line on the wrong side of the fabric at 0.8 cm seam allowance. So for the second stitch line for the French seam, everything stays the same except for the needle position. It's going to be at 1. Put my fabric. I'm still going to use the edge of footer as a guide. Make sure you reverse at the start and end of your stitch line. So that's my second stitch line. So that's the second stitch line I've done. So if you open up and look at the right side, to be honest, from the right side, you would not be able to tell what seam finishings you've been using. The only way you can tell is if you flip it to the wrong side, and you can see there's this bone in there. That's the distinct feature of a French seam. So there you have it, the French seam.